The moment he said it, I felt my ribs tighten like they'd been cinched by a belt. Still grateful for the $5,000 a month, Mom. His voice was too soft to be overheard, but the words sliced through me with the precision of someone who knew exactly where my heart lived. I stood there, under golden lights, surrounded by laughter and champagne, and the faint sounds of a live jazz band. My son's hands were on my shoulders, pulling me into what must have looked like a warm, loving New Year's hug to the guests watching. But behind his polished smile, his eyes were cruel, dismissive, distant. I couldn't find my voice. My mouth opened, but nothing came. My fingers clutched the thin stem of my champagne glass tighter, and I nodded, like an idiot, like someone who was indeed grateful. Still grateful. I excused myself with a smile that didn't reach my cheeks, walked too fast, found the guest bathroom, locked the door, and leaned against the cool wall tiles. My chest caved in, and I cried. My makeup smeared. My stomach knotted. I didn't want to sob, not here, not like this, but the pain was too thick to swallow. It wasn't the money. God knows I didn't care about the money. It was the way he said it, like I was some aging stray he kept alive out of guilt, like he'd forgotten everything I gave up so he could stand here in this $1 million home with that wife on his arm and those eyes that no longer saw me as his mother. Let me know where you're listening from. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. And if this story speaks to you, share your thoughts below. Don't skip, because what happens at the end will surprise you more than the betrayal itself. It was supposed to be a joyful evening. Fireworks, champagne hugs, family. But standing there in that glittering house, I felt like a ghost. An accessory? My name wasn't even on the invitation. Hosted by Julian and Elise Grant. Not Julian Grant and family. Not Julian's son of Margaret. Just him and her. I'd become a quiet footnote in his glossy life. He was 6 when his father died. I remember him clutching my coat at the funeral, his tiny hands wrapped around my fingers, like they were the only thing anchoring him to the earth. I swore to him that day I'd never let him feel alone again. I'd worked night shifts early mornings, cried in silence so he'd never hear, missed meals to make sure he ate. When he got into college, I took out loans, quiet loans, ones he never knew about. He thought he earned a scholarship. He didn't. I made sure he didn't see me crumble. But tonight, under those lights, I saw the truth of what he'd become. A man who thought he'd purchased my silence with a monthly deposit. Who believed that money erased history? Who smiled at me with pity, not pride? And worst of all, a man who forgot love the moment he tasted power. When I finally wiped my tears and looked in the mirror, I saw a stranger staring back. My lipstick was smeared, my eyes red, my hair carefully pinned, now slightly undone. But what haunted me most was the expression. Hollow, betrayed. I took a breath, then another. Then I did what I always do. I put on a smile and walked back out like nothing happened. The crowd was dancing now. Julian was nowhere to be seen. Elise caught my eye across the room, raising a glass like we shared some joke. I didn't return the gesture. I quietly picked up my coat, left the gift I'd wrapped for them on the entry table, and walked out the front door without a word. The cold air hit my face like a slap, but it woke me up. And somewhere between their doorstep and my car, something in me shifted. I'd spent years swallowing pain, silently accepting the slow erasure of my place in his life. But not anymore. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg, but I wasn't going to disappear either. Because what he didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that I still held something they overlooked, a truth buried under years of grief and sacrifice. Something my husband left behind meant only for me. I hadn't touched it in decades, but tonight something told me it was time. That hug wasn't a moment of connection, it was a warning, and my tears, they weren't weakness, they were a letting go. Letting go of the illusion that I still mattered to him. Letting go of the hope that the boy I raised was still in there. Letting go of waiting. I didn't drive home. I drove to the storage unit I hadn't opened in almost 20 years. The one that still bore my husband's initials on the lockbox. I sat in the car for a full minute before unlocking the door. My hands trembled not from the cold, but from what I might find, or what I might feel. Inside was dust, boxes, faded labels, and in the back corner, the one thing I hadn't touched since the day of his funeral, his ledger. My husband had been meticulous, obsessive even, every document labeled, every account noted. Before he died, he told me, if anything ever goes wrong, if you ever feel like you're losing everything, open the blue one. I thought it was just sentimental. I never believed I'd need it. Until now. I opened the box, and what I saw inside changed everything. I held the blue ledger in my hands like it was a relic from another life. The cover was cracked from time and dry air, the corners soft with wear. My husband Robert never did anything halfway. Even in grief, even when the cancer took his voice, he wrote everything down. Bills, trust funds, policies, legal clauses, I never fully understood. I sat down on an overturned milk crate in that cold storage unit and opened the first page. His handwriting, firm, slanted, confident, for Margaret in case the world ever forgets who you are. I covered my mouth with one hand and just stared. He had known. Somehow, even back then, he had known the world would shift beneath me one day. I flipped the pages slowly. Bank accounts I didn't recognize. Property titles in both our names, including one in Vermont I hadn't visited since Julian was 4. And then I found it a trust. Established 2 months before he died. My name, Julian's name, and a clause I'd never seen. It was written like a code, but I recognized the key access deferred to surviving spouse upon maturity of successor's independence or breach of filial duty. I didn't need a lawyer to translate that. Robert had given me a way out, a weapon wrapped in love. Julian was only a child when this was created, but Robert saw the future in a way I hadn't. And now, all these years later, my son's smug whisper at that party had triggered something deeper than insult. It had opened the door to retribution I didn't even know I had. I stayed in that storage unit until the sun started to rise. Cold crept into my bones, but I didn't feel it. I was too busy reading, too busy remembering. Every word in that ledger was a reminder of what I had given, what we had built, and what had been so easily dismissed by our son in a moment of careless arrogance. But he didn't know about this, and Elise certainly didn't. I left with the ledger tucked into my coat, and a new resolve taking shape in my chest. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even revenge yet. It was clarity. The kind that comes only when the last illusion shatters. Back home, I made tea, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the empty chair across from me. The one Robert used to sit in. For a moment, I imagined what he'd say if he saw me now. I could almost hear it. You gave everything, Maggie, time to remember who you are. I ran my fingers along the spine of the ledger. I wasn't sure what I'd do yet, but I knew I wouldn't go back to being invisible. Julian had built his empire on charm and cleverness, but I knew things about him no one else did. I knew about the money I funneled into his first business idea. The one he now claimed was bootstrapped from nothing. I knew about the tax oversight in 2014, the NDA I signed to protect him, the favors, the silence I'd given him year after year as he drifted away. The world saw Julian Grant, tech mogul, investor, philanthropist. But I saw Julian, my boy, who used to fall asleep on my chest whispering, "Don't let go." Somewhere along the way, he had let go. Of me, of truth, of decency. But I never did. I just waited. Too long. That month, I said nothing to him. Nothing to Elise. I let the $5,000 come in like usual. Smiled politely when he texted short replies to my holiday photo messages. "Looks cozy, Mom." That's all he said about the snow-covered tree I decorated alone. I replied with a heart emoji. No words. Let him think I was the same as before. But I wasn't. I called an attorney, not just any lawyer. Robert's old associate, Michael Herron. He'd retired, but when I said my name over the phone, there was a long pause. Then a quiet voice said, "Margaret, I've been waiting for this call for 20 years. That stunned me. "You knew about the trust?" I asked. "I knew Robert left you something strong," he said. "And I knew one day you'd need help holding it steady." We arranged a meeting, quiet, off record, in a coffee shop 2 towns over. He brought copies of papers I didn't even know existed. Titles, conditions, provisions. "This isn't just a safety net," Michael said, tapping the thick folder. "It's leverage, and Julian has no legal right to touch it." I felt something stir in me, not triumph, not yet, but power. The kind of power I hadn't felt in decades, and I didn't even want to use it to hurt him. Not at first. I just wanted him to remember. To see me again. To know the woman behind the checks and holiday cards wasn't a ghost. But power once awakened is hard to contain. Michael leaned forward and asked, "What do you want to do?" I didn't answer right away. My hands shook. My voice felt lodged in my throat. But then I said, "I want to remind my son who raised him, and I want his wife to know I'm not for sale." Michael smiled. Not kindly, more like a man who's seen war and knows the moment before the first shot is fired. "Then we'll do it quietly," he said, "and by the time they realize you'll already be 10 steps ahead." That night, I couldn't sleep. I looked at the old family photos. Julian as a toddler. Julian in his graduation cap. Us at the beach. I tried to feel guilt. I tried to feel hesitation, but I didn't. I felt free. For the first time in years, I was stepping off the sidelines. I wasn't going to scream or storm into his office. No. I was going to dismantle the illusion one piece at a time. 2 weeks passed before I heard from Julian again. It was a short call, casual in tone, like nothing had happened. "Hey, Mom. Just wanted to check if the wire came through." "Everything good." I had just finished boiling pasta and wiped my hands on a towel before picking up. "Yes, thank you," I said, keeping my voice warm, measured, familiar. There was a brief silence on his end. Then he said, "Great. Okay, Elise says hi. We might be in Aspen next month, but we'll do dinner sometime after that." "Sounds nice," I replied, already knowing it wouldn't happen. It never did. "Take care, Julian." We hung up, just like that. Less than 2 minutes, a son calling his mother like a boss checking in on payroll. I stood there in my kitchen and let the silence ring. Then I turned off the stove. Appetite gone. The next morning, I began organizing everything. I laid out Robert's ledger, Michael's folders, and every document with Julian's name on it, old savings transfers, co-signed loans, gift letters from when he bought his first condo, receipts from a decade ago that proved I funded more than just his tuition. All of it. Evidence not of guilt, but of my invisible presence in every part of his success. Michael called it narrative ammunition. I called it memory. Elise was harder to track. Her social media showed a perfect life, designer outfits, lavish parties, fundraisers where she smiled like a queen among peasants. But Michael dug deeper. Her name's not on any of his major assets, he said during our third meeting. She's built a brand around being the woman behind the man, but legally, she's just a guest in the house. That intrigued me. I didn't want to hurt her, but I did want her to understand. Her influence over Julian came with a cost, one I wasn't going to pay anymore. Then the article came out, a puff piece in a mid-tier business magazine interviewing Julian about his humble beginnings and the struggles of growing up with a single mother on welfare. I stared at the headline. I read it 5 times. I nearly dropped my coffee. I wasn't ashamed of our hard years, but he knew we never took welfare. I had worked. Every hour, every dollar scraped together with dignity. And now, here he was, telling the world I'd been poor and helpless so he could shine brighter. I felt the fire inside me change temperature. No longer just heat. Now it was sharp, controlled, ready. That night, I sent him a text. Just one sentence saw the article. "You should visit sometime. I have something of Dad's. I think you'd want to see." He replied 2 hours later. "Will do. Been meaning to swing by anyway. Busy month?" I didn't text back. I waited. 3 more weeks passed. Then one afternoon, unannounced, he showed up, dressed in a gray coat, designer scarf, watch that probably cost more than my car. He kissed my cheek like a politician and walked into the living room without waiting for an invitation. "House looks the same," he said, glancing around. "You still doing those puzzles?" I nodded. "Helps keep my mind sharp." He chuckled, distracted. "Elise says hi. She's got a shoot this week. Some foundation gala thing." I poured tea. Still modeling more branding now. She's on a few boards. He sipped. Didn't taste it. "So what's this thing from Dad?" I stood up, walked to the cabinet, and pulled out the folder. Thick. Labeled. Everything Michael and I had compiled. I set it on the table in front of him. "This," I said softly, "is the full record of everything your father set aside. For me. For you. For our family." He raised an eyebrow. "Okay." "And this," I continued, placing a smaller envelope beside it, "is the original trust your father created. The one you've never seen." He laughed, but there was a flicker of tension in his eyes now. "Mom, what is this? Why are you pulling out legal stuff?" I folded my hands in my lap. "Because I think you've forgotten the story of how you got here. And because I think you believe that $5,000 a month is what I'm worth." He leaned back slowly. "Come on, don't start this again. I've always supported you. You've paid me like a silent shareholder," I said. "And I've let you. For years. But after that New Year's party, after what you said to me, I realized you don't see me as your mother anymore. You see me as a liability." His face hardened. "You're twisting this. That was a joke. You took it wrong." "No," I said. "You meant it. And now I want to remind you who I am." He opened the folder, skimmed the contents. His face changed. Subtle, but it was there, the shift from arrogance to caution. "Where did you get this?" "From your father," I said. "The man who trusted me with everything he built, and trusted you to grow up with respect." He didn't respond right away. Then, "So what do you want?" "Money," I almost laughed. "No, Julian. I want memory. I want dignity. And I want you to understand that I've never been kept. I've always been giving. The difference is, I'm done pretending I don't notice the difference." He stared at the papers again, then at me. "And if I ignore all this," I smiled, "then you'll watch it go public. Quietly, strategically. Every donor you have, every investor Elise tries to charm, they'll see the real structure behind your rise. And they'll wonder what else you've hidden." His jaw clenched. "You wouldn't try me," I whispered. He stood. This is low. This, I said, standing to his legacy. You erased your father. You disfigured the truth. I'm just rebalancing the story. He walked out without another word, and I didn't follow. I sat back down, finished my tea, and turned the page on my puzzle. After he left, the house felt bigger than it ever had. Quieter, too. Not peaceful, but emptied. Julian didn't slam the door, but the echo of it lingered for hours. I kept glancing at the folder still on the table as if it might whisper something new. But it didn't. Everything I needed was already in motion. The confrontation wasn't just about power. It was about waking something in him. Something I wasn't sure still existed. That boy who used to sit on my lap, who'd cry when I left for my night shifts, who'd hand me drawings that said, "To the best mommy in the world." Somewhere along the way, he let that part die. Or worse, buried it alive beneath ambition and image. I didn't cry after he left. I didn't even flinch. That surprised me. I sat with that stillness. Measured it. It wasn't numbness, it was certainty. The next day, I drove to Michael's office. We had agreed not to do anything drastic until after Julian had a chance to respond. But now I told him, we go silent. I don't want him to think I'm chasing him. I want him to sit with it. Michael nodded. Silence is pressure. Let him wonder. He'll talk to Elise. That'll be the beginning of their cracks. I knew he was right. I'd watched Elise at parties, the way she clung to social capital like oxygen. Her brand was tied to Julian's myth. If she sensed the truth threatening that, she'd panic. Over the following weeks, I returned to my routines outwardly unchanged. Gardened, cooked for myself, volunteered at the library every Thursday. People waved to me like nothing was different, and I smiled back like nothing underneath my skin had shifted. But inside, I was mapping everything. Quietly. I requested a copy of the Vermont estate deed. Set up a second trust in my grandson's name. Met with a financial advisor under a pseudonym. Michael handled the details, but I approved every move. Carefully. Strategically. My whole life I'd given without documentation. Now I kept records like scripture. Julian didn't call. Not once. But Elise did. It was a Tuesday evening when my phone lit up with her name. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but I wanted to hear her voice. See if she'd cracked. Margaret, she said too cheerfully. I was just thinking of you. Julian mentioned you had some old files from his dad. That's so fascinating. We'd love to go through them sometime, maybe organize a little family archive. Her words rolled over me like perfumed sweet hollow trying too hard. That's thoughtful of you, I said. But I've already filed the relevant ones with my attorney. There was a pause. Oh. Well, I'm sure that's just for safekeeping, right? Nothing serious. I didn't respond. Just let the silence sit. She filled it quickly. You know it's funny. Julian's been so busy and I keep telling him, you should call your mom, she's the reason you're here. He really does appreciate you. He shows it in very creative ways, I said flatly. Elise laughed, but it sounded nervous. You know how men are. I almost asked if she'd ever really known my son at all. But I held my tongue. I'm sure we'll talk soon, I said. I hope your Aspen trip was lovely. Her breath caught. Oh, I didn't know you knew about that. I know a lot more than I let on Elise. I let that sit. Then I hung up. No goodbye. 2 days later, Julian sent me an email. Not a call, not a visit, an email. Titled, Moving Forward. It was cold, formal, and entirely performative. Dear Mom, it read, I appreciate your dedication to Dad's estate and understand there may have been miscommunications in the past regarding contributions and assets. I suggest we arrange a formal sit-down with legal representation on both sides to clarify expectations and preserve familial harmony. Respectfully, Julian, No apology, no ownership, just legal positioning masked as diplomacy. I didn't respond. I forwarded it to Michael. His reply, he's scared. This is him flailing politely. I started preparing my own letter, not to Julian, to his son, my grandson, a sealed envelope, handwritten. In it, I explained everything. Not the legal parts, not the business. The truth. About his father, about me, about legacy. I wrote it not to weaponize the boy, but to free him. One day he'd read it, maybe sooner than I thought. He was 16 now, quiet, observant, unlike his parents. He visited me once that month, alone. I asked him how school was. He said fine. Then added, "Are you mad at Dad?" I looked at him carefully. No, I'm disappointed in who he became. He nodded slowly, like he understood more than he said. I miss when we used to bake cookies, he said. Me too, I replied. After he left, I added one last paragraph to the letter. That weekend, I visited the Vermont house for the first time in 21 years. It was still there. Dusty, overgrown, but solid. Paid off. Untouched. The caretaker, an old friend of Robert's, greeted me like no time had passed. He told me you'd come back someday, he said. I stood in the front yard and breathed. Cold air, clean, uncluttered. I imagined Julian's face if he saw it. The place he didn't even know existed. His name wasn't on it. Never had been. I took a photo. Sent it to Michael. Captioned it, Phase 2 begins. And then I waited, not for Julian to come back. For him to realize I wasn't. It started with a headline, small, almost forgettable at first. Grant Tech investors request clarification amid legacy trust confusion. Buried in a tech blog that only industry insiders followed. But the story grew legs. Within days, whispers turned into boardroom tension. Elise's polished smile began to crack. In curated Instagram photos, the comments noticed it first. I watched it all unfold from the quiet of my kitchen, sipping coffee, while my old radio hummed Frank Sinatra tunes in the background. I didn't leak the trust information directly. I didn't have to. Michael had warned me. The second we file your amendment with the probate office, it becomes public record. If someone stumbles on it, well, that's just transparency. And someone did stumble. An investor with too many spreadsheets and not enough patience. Julian didn't call, but his lawyer did. Mrs. Grant, I'm reaching out on behalf of Mr. Julian Grant regarding recent filings connected to your late husband's estate. I cut him off. You can direct all future communication to my attorney, Mr. Heron. He paused. Very well. Then softer. You understand this has created significant noise. I didn't create the noise, I said. I just stopped cleaning up after it. Click. The next day, Elise posted a photo from a charity gala. Caption, Building Legacies, Honoring Our Pasts. A pathetic attempt at narrative control. But the comments betrayed the undertone. Didn't her husband get sued last year? I thought the money came from his mom's side. Weird how none of this came up before. Michael called me that afternoon. They're spiraling. You've rattled the mask. I asked, what's the next move? He didn't hesitate. We pressed gently. Not publicly. Not yet. You have the power now, let them come to you. But I wasn't in a rush. I'd waited decades. I could wait a little longer. A week later, Julian showed up again. No notice. No smile this time. Just stood on my porch in the rain with his hands in his pockets. I opened the door, looked at him, didn't say a word. He cleared his throat. Can we talk? I stepped aside. He walked in slowly, like he was trying to remember the layout of a place he once called home. I led him to the same table. The ledger was gone, replaced now with tea and silence. I didn't know, he said, voice low, about the Vermont house, about the full scope of Dad's assets. That's because you didn't ask, I replied. You assumed I had nothing but what you gave me. You believed your own story. He didn't argue, just stared at the table. I've made mistakes. Yes, I said, but the worst was forgetting who raised you. His eyes flicked up. Wet. Not crying, but close. Elise thinks we should settle this legally, create a media response, maybe lean into the legacy angle. She wants to get ahead of it. I said nothing. He added, but I don't want to go to war with you. You already did, I said. You just didn't know it. He leaned forward. So what now? I looked at him. My son, flesh of my flesh, a man I barely recognized. Now I said, you choose, quiet dignity or very public truth. He swallowed hard. What do you want? The question came out broken, like a boy again. I waited a long moment, then said, first, I want full transfer of all trust records to my attorney. I want your legal signature acknowledging you misrepresented your inheritance. I want you to stop referring to me as a welfare recipient in any public narrative. And lastly, I paused. I want Elise out of my affairs completely. No messages, no calls, no performances. He nodded slowly. Done. And in return, he asked. In return, I said, I won't burn down what's left of your image. I won't expose the lies. I won't let the board know about the offshore account your father never sanctioned. He flinched. We both knew that was the real sword I held. He sat back, ran his hand through his hair, then said something I didn't expect. I'm sorry. It didn't erase anything. But it was a start, or the start of the end. I stood, walked over to the window. Rain tapped gently on the glass. You know what hurts the most? I asked. It's not the money. It's not the headlines. It's not even Elise. I turned back to him. It's that you looked at me, the woman who broke herself in half for you, and saw a cost instead of a foundation. He looked away. Couldn't meet my eyes. I'm going to Vermont, I said. I'll be gone for a few weeks. There's a fireplace there, and a porch swing. I think I'd like to remember who I was before all this. He stood too. Will you come back? I didn't answer. Just handed him a sealed envelope. This is your copy of the agreement. Michael has the rest. He took it, didn't open it. I'll make it right, he said. I'll try. I nodded, not because I believed him, but because he needed to believe it himself. He left without another hug. No smugness this time, no whispered cruelty, just rain on his coat and regret in his posture. That night, I lit a candle beside Robert's photo. He blinked first, I whispered. But I didn't need him to beg, just to remember. I touched the frame. I hope you're proud. I didn't shout. I didn't fight. I just prepared. And now the next phase could begin. The quiet part was over. It was time for the shift. It began with Elise's disappearance from the spotlight. Not literal, no. She still posted, still smiled in her filtered reels and sponsored brand partnerships. But there was a dullness behind her eyes now. The shine had dimmed. Her captions shifted, more vague inspiration, fewer mentions of Julian. No more building our legacy together. And for someone like her, silence is as loud as scandal. Investors started asking questions, at first subtle, then more pointed. What's her actual role in Grant Tech again? Is she an executive, a partner? Why's her name on the speaker list but not the board? Elise, who had once strolled into every gala on Julian's arm like a crowned queen, now stood just a few steps behind him, close enough to smile, far enough to signal the storm between them. I didn't reach out. I didn't need to. The foundation of their power had always been built on illusion, curated love, rewritten pasts, exaggerated sacrifice. But now cracks were visible, and the more Julian tried to hold it together, the more frantic he looked. Michael called me one morning, His PR firm contacted ours. Off the record, of course. They want reassurance. A statement from you, even a sentence. Something they can use to close the lid. I sipped my tea and said, "No lid. Let them wonder." Michael chuckled. "You're colder than I expected, Margaret." "Not cold," I said. "Just done waiting for respect I earned 20 years ago." I spent my days in Vermont. The old house hadn't changed much, still creaked when the wind shifted, still smelled like cedar and warm dust. I opened the windows and let the past drift in like a slow tide. Photographs lined the mantel. Julian at 7, holding a fishing rod. Robert beside him, kneeling, smiling, with sunburnt cheeks. I stared at that photo longer than the others. Wondered if that moment had meant more to me than to either of them. By the end of the first week, I received a handwritten letter from Julian. I recognized the effort, his handwriting not typed. Short, honest in its own stilted way. "I know I failed you. I know I let her twist what was left of us. But I remember everything. The puzzles. The soup when I was sick. The nights you stayed awake on the couch until I came home from college parties. I'm sorry I forgot how much of me came from you. I don't expect forgiveness. Just a chance to prove I haven't disappeared completely. It wasn't redemption, but it was something." I tucked the letter into Robert's ledger. Let it sit there, with the rest of history. Meanwhile, Grant Tech faltered. Slowly, then suddenly, a key investor pulled out. A board member resigned for personal reasons. Their IPO rumors died. Elise went dark for 5 days, unheard of for someone so digitally addicted. When she returned, it was to post a photograph of an ocean view with the words, "Sometimes you have to lose everything to see clearly." Comments were brutal. Sounds like divorce bait. "What happened to your perfect life? Did mommy cut the funds?" I didn't smile. But I didn't feel bad either. Julian called again. This time, he sounded tired. I thought I had everything figured out. "You did," I said. "You just forgot where you started." Silence. "Then I'm dissolving Elise's personal brand contracts from the business." A pause. "I should have done that years ago. She manipulated everything. The photos, the narratives. Me." "No," I said. "You let her. That's the part you need to sit with." He exhaled. "I want to come to Vermont. Just to talk. No games." I didn't answer right away. The idea of seeing him here in this house with its memories and truths unnerved me. But something inside me whispered, "Let him walk through the past. Let him see what you preserved." So I said yes. He arrived 2 days later, alone. No driver, no watch. Just jeans, a wrinkled coat, and eyes that finally looked like someone I once knew. We didn't hug. We just stood in the doorway for a moment before I stepped aside. "Come in." He looked around, like he was trying to breathe history. His eyes paused on the photo over the fireplace. "I forgot about that trip," he said. "I didn't," I replied. We sat on the back porch. The wind had calmed just enough for the swing to move softly on its own. He spoke first. "I told myself for years that I did it all alone, that I earned every bit of what I have." I nodded. "That's the lie the world loves most, the solo success story." He looked at me. "You were never just a helper. You were the reason." My throat tightened, but I kept my tone steady. "I don't need your gratitude. I need your integrity." "I'm working on it," he said. "Elise, she's already talking to divorce attorneys. She said I made her look weak." I raised an eyebrow. "She did that on her own. You just stopped protecting her from consequences." He smiled, not with joy, but with something close to relief. We sat in silence for a while. Then he asked, "What happens now?" I thought for a long moment. "I don't want your money, Julian. I never did. But I've rewritten the will." Your son inherits directly. You'll get a letter, that's all. No cash, no property, just words. The rest goes where your father wanted it: veterans' education grants, widowed spouses, real causes. He didn't argue, just nodded. Fair. We stood, and I walked him to the door. As he stepped out, I touched his arm lightly. You were a good boy once. I hope you find that part of yourself again. He blinked hard, then nodded. When he drove off, I didn't watch the car disappear. I walked back inside, lit the fireplace, and sat with the weight of everything I'd released. Not vengeance, not punishment, just correction. And it was enough. I didn't expect the letter, not after all the silence, not after the subtle admissions and awkward goodbyes. It arrived in early spring, tucked inside a thick, unbranded envelope with no return address. But I recognized Julian's handwriting instantly. It had the same slight leftward lean he'd had as a child, pressing too hard with every stroke, like he was trying to prove something. I stood at the mailbox for a long while, the paper trembling in my hands, before I went back inside, sat at the kitchen table, and opened it slowly, like peeling back a wound. Mom, it began. No dear, no formality, just the word alone. Simple. Exposed. I've been waking up at 3 a.m. most nights. Elise moved out last week, took her things. Left a note that said, "You let her take us apart." I laughed when I read it, but it wasn't funny. Not really. She didn't love me, not the real me. She loved the idea she built the mogul, the public speaker, the man whose mother was conveniently poor and pitiful. She fed that image. I let her. And you disappeared into it without protest. I saw your face at that party. I ignored it. I knew what I'd said would hurt. I said it anyway. I thought it gave me control. I had to stop reading, just for a moment. I felt my chest pull tight, like someone had wrapped both hands around my lungs and squeezed. Not because it was too much, because it was too late. I read on. I remember things now that I hadn't let myself think about in years, like the time I wanted that Nintendo and you said we couldn't afford it, but then I found it under the tree anyway. You told me Santa must have been extra kind. But I saw your eyes. I saw the way your coat was thinner that winter. I knew even then. I just chose to forget. Forgetting made me stronger in rooms filled with people who measured worth by inheritance. They never would have understood a mother who scrubbed hospital floors after tucking her son into bed. That kind of strength didn't translate. I closed my eyes. Robert used to say that memory was a battlefield, that the things we try hardest to forget are the ones with the sharpest teeth. I reached for his photo on the bookshelf, whispered, "He remembers now." The letter continued. I'm not writing this to undo what I've done. I know I can't. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for clarity. You were never weak. You were never dependent. You carried me on your back and made it look like we were walking side by side. And I diminished that to a monthly deposit. I turned motherhood into maintenance. I can't explain it. I think Elise saw the threat in you early on, a kind of honesty she couldn't match. She convinced me you were clinging. But I see it now. You were holding. My hand rested on the table, gently tapping the corner of the letter, like I was trying to sync my heartbeat to his words. He ended it simply. I hope one day you'll let me visit again. Not to talk about the trust or the business or the damage. Just to sit, to remember something real. Yours, Julian? I didn't cry. Not at first. I sat in the quiet and reread the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it inside the ledger where everything else lived. Not forgiven, not forgotten, but recorded. Later that day, I went to the shed behind the Vermont house. Robert's old fishing gear was still there. Rusted dusty, but intact. I cleaned the rods and placed them by the porch. If Julian ever came back, I'd take him down to the lake where he first caught a sunfish with Robert and held it like a trophy. Maybe memory could be more than a weapon. Maybe it could be a bridge. 2 weeks passed. No word. I didn't expect any. Then on a cloudy Thursday morning, a car pulled into the gravel driveway. Slowly, carefully. Julian stepped out wearing an old sweater, not branded, not styled. Just worn. Real. We didn't speak right away. He walked up the steps, stopped a foot away from me. I saw the hesitation. I saw the effort. I brought something, he said. He held out a photo. Framed. A reprint of that fishing trip, the same one from the fireplace, but larger. Restored. I wanted you to have this, he said, from me. Not from the company, not from Elise. Just me. I took it. Nodded. Thank you. We didn't talk much that afternoon. We sat on the porch, shared a blanket when the wind picked up, drank hot tea with too much honey, and when he finally left, he said, I'm trying. Not because I think it'll fix it, but because I think you deserve better from me now. As I watched him drive away, I knew this wasn't redemption. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was acknowledgement. And sometimes that's the beginning of something better than forgiveness. Something cleaner, more enduring. That night, I opened a new folder. Labeled it Reclamation. Placed the letter, the photo, and a single note I wrote myself. He remembered. On his own. Without being forced. That matters. And for the first time in years, I slept without waking once. The snow melted slow that year. Vermont lingered in winter longer than usual, the lake staying frozen just enough to delay the early fishermen from their usual bustle. I liked it that way. It gave me more time. More silence. After Julian's visit, things didn't return to what they were. They couldn't, but the air around me changed. Less brittle. Less heavy. As if the universe had finally exhaled after years of holding its breath. He didn't call again right away, and I didn't expect him to. The letter had done its work. The visit had anchored the moment. The rest would be a matter of time and distance. Healing wasn't something I'd rush, and I wasn't looking for a happy ending. Just peace. I stayed in the house, longer than I planned. I cleaned out the attic, found an old box of Julian's childhood toys, a red fire truck with chipped paint, a plastic robot missing an arm, and a faded birthday card from his 5th year, written by Robert. You are stronger than you know, my boy. I pressed the card to my chest and closed my eyes. So much had happened between then and now. And yet, those words still meant something. The town nearby hadn't changed much. The grocer still remembered me. The librarian still wore the same glasses from 20 years ago. When they asked how long I was staying, I said, just until the ice melts. But even I knew that wasn't true. Vermont felt more like home now than any place I'd known in years. Maybe because no one here treated me like Julian's mother or Elise's shadow. I was just Margaret, the widow who came back. Michael called often to keep me updated. Julian had formally removed Elise from all business holdings. She'd lawyered up, of course, but her claims were hollow. No equity, no contracts, no stake, just noise. The board didn't back her. Investors didn't bite. And just like that, the woman who once hovered at the center of every staged photo vanished from the stage. Julian's reputation didn't recover overnight, but the air cleared enough to keep his company breathing. He issued a soft, public statement, not an apology, but a recalibration. I owe much of who I am to the sacrifices of my mother, who remained silent while I spoke too loudly. That line made headlines. Comment sections split. Some accused him of damage control. Others praised the humility. I didn't comment. didn't repost, but I saw it, and I saved it. Not for pride, but for proof. One afternoon, I walked down to the lake and saw something unexpected. My grandson sitting on the dock legs dangling over the side. He turned, grinned. Dad said I could come up for the weekend. My heart caught in my throat. Did he bring you? I asked. Nah. He said you might want a break from him. He booked me a bus and packed me a lunch. It was cool. He opened his backpack and pulled out a sandwich. Turkey and mustard. Dad's trying, huh? I laughed softly. He's got a long road. Yeah, he said, chewing, but at least he's on it now. We spent the afternoon playing cards on the porch. He told me about schoolgirls, his plans to study music, not business, not tech. He said he wanted to write songs, not pop stuff, something quiet, stuff people feel. I told him his grandfather used to hum while working in the garage. Nothing fancy, just soft little tunes. You've got that in you, I think. Before bed, he helped me stack firewood. As we worked, he asked, "Do you think Dad hates himself now?" I paused. I think he's seeing himself clearly for the first time in a long while. And that's not easy for anyone. He nodded. I don't want to be like him. Then don't, I said. Be better. Start now. That night, after he'd gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room and stared at the flames. The crackling wood reminded me of Robert's laugh, warm, sharp, always with an edge of mischief. We did good, I whispered to the dark. We lost a lot, but we saved something, didn't we? I picked up the pen and started the final version of my will. It was simple. The Vermont house would go to my grandson. The accounts tied to Robert's trust were now redirected 60% to education grants for underprivileged youth, 25% to veteran assistance programs, and the remaining 15% to a small arts foundation Julian didn't even know I supported. As for Julian himself, I left him the ledger. Nothing else, just the truth in ink. The numbers, the history, the notes in Robert's hand. The rest he'd have to earn. The next morning, my grandson asked if he could take the photo of Robert and Julian fishing. I want to hang it in my dorm room when I go. I smiled. Of course. But take this too. I handed him a folded piece of paper, the letter Julian wrote me. Don't read it now, but one day you should, when you're trying to decide what kind of man you want to be. He nodded, eyes serious in a way far beyond his age. I'll take care of it. He left that afternoon. I stood on the porch watching the bus roll away. My hand didn't wave. My chest didn't ache. Just calm. Just closure. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine, sat in Robert's old chair, and looked around the room. Not a palace, not modern, but honest, real, mine. I had been erased for years by wealth, by silence, by the very people I loved most. And now, I had returned not with vengeance, but with proof. Proof that I mattered, that I had never been weak, that a mother's sacrifices don't fade, even if the world forgets to say thank you. Let them rewrite their stories. I had finally written mine. The house felt lighter after that. Not because anything had changed, really, the furniture stayed where it was. The creaking stairs still groaned under my weight. The wind still whistled around the eaves at night. But something inside had lifted. Something that had been lodged in my chest for years, like a stone grinding me down every time I saw Julian on a magazine cover or heard Elise's voice through a speaker at one of those staged fundraisers. That stone was gone. Not because they apologized enough, or because anything had been repaired, but because I had stopped waiting for them to do it. I had taken back the story. In early May, I returned to my old home, the one Julian bought for me, the one I had stayed in all those years like a well-kept prisoner. I walked through it like a museum visitor, Everything was neat, curated, sanitized. His decorator had once described it as timeless coastal minimalism. But it didn't have a single photo of Robert, not one picture of Julian before his 20s. Just glass, marble, the scent of expensive, impersonal candles. I stood in the living room, where he once dropped that first check in my hand, and said, "Now you can stop worrying." As if money had ever been the worry. I didn't tell him I was visiting. I didn't need to. I had my own key, the one he probably forgot still existed. I only came to gather the last of my things. Some books, a box of old letters, a small wooden jewelry box that Robert gave me on our 10th anniversary. Inside it, I kept things no money could replace: a lock of Julian's baby hair, a faded concert ticket from a show Robert and I snuck into before we were married, and the first Mother's Day card Julian ever wrote me, complete with a crooked stick figure holding flowers. I ran my finger over the drawing and whispered, "You were everything to me." Back in Vermont, I unpacked the box and set those memories in a glass cabinet beside the fireplace. No fanfare, no dramatics, just preservation. That was what this all came down to in the end: what you keep and what you let go. Julian sent another letter in late spring. Less emotional, more reflective. I told the board I'm stepping down as CEO. They'll keep me on as founder, but I need space. I told them I've got repairs to make that don't show up on balance sheets. Some didn't understand. That's fine. I wasn't speaking to them anyway. I smiled when I read that, not because I pitied him, but because he was finally beginning to see the value in silence, in retreat, in building things that didn't flash under stage lights. I wrote back this time. "The Vermont house is doing well. Your son came again last weekend. He split firewood without complaint, made me pancakes Sunday morning. You'd have laughed. He burned the first batch. But he's learning. I hope you are too." I signed it with just my name, Margaret. Not Mom. I wanted him to earn that again. A month later, I received an invitation. A small envelope, cream-colored, elegant in its simplicity. Julian's handwriting on the front. Inside, an invitation to a private family event. "Just us," he wrote. "No press. No Elise. I want to acknowledge you properly, for everything." I didn't reply right away. I let it sit on the kitchen counter for 3 days. I'd spent years saying yes to things that hurt. I didn't owe him attendance just because he finally remembered I had blood and bones beneath my patience. But on the 4th morning, I packed a bag. The event was held in a modest hall near the coast, not far from where Julian now lived. No photographers, no gala lights, just a rented space with folding chairs and a single projector screen looping old home videos. Julian met me at the door. He looked different, softer. His eyes searched mine before he said anything. "You look strong," he said. "I am," I replied. He walked me inside. Only a few people were there: his son, one old college friend, 2 board members I recognized vaguely. Julian stood at the front, cleared his throat, and began. "I've spent the better part of my adult life pretending I made myself. That's the truth. I gave speeches about grit ambition and bootstraps. But what I never said, what I never had the courage to admit, was that I didn't build anything alone." He looked at me. I stood on the shoulders of a woman who carried me without complaint, who sacrificed more than anyone ever saw, and who accepted my scraps in return. The room was silent. "I didn't bring you here to perform. I brought you here because I need to say something out loud. Not for a headline, not for redemption. Just because it's true." He turned fully toward me. "I'm sorry, Mom. I forgot. I forgot who you were, what you gave, and what I took." His voice cracked. "I forgot how much I loved you. I didn't stand, didn't cry." I nodded once. Firm, steady. Afterward, his son pulled me aside. "I've never seen him like that," he said. "I think he finally gets it." I looked at him tall now, with that same fire Robert used to have behind his eyes, and I said, "Don't wait until you forget to start remembering." On the way home, I didn't replay the speech. I didn't cling to it. I let it sit where it belonged in the past. It had been spoken. That was enough. Back in Vermont, the flowers had started blooming, small bursts of color against the green. I sat on the porch with a blanket over my legs, tea in hand, and thought, maybe this is what healing looks like. Not perfection, not reunion, just peace blooming in slow, steady silence. Summer settled in slow like a cautious guest, unsure whether it was truly welcome. Vermont breathed easier during those months. The trees unfurled their full green. The lake shimmered with light instead of ice, and the porch swing creaked lazily in the evening breeze. I didn't travel much, didn't feel the need to. My world had become smaller, and strangely, that made everything feel larger, more vivid, more mine. My grandson came up almost every weekend now. He never asked permission. He didn't need to. He'd just text me, "Coming up," and I'd reply, "Extra pancakes ready." It became a rhythm one I cherished quietly. He liked to sit on the dock with his guitar, a cheap second-hand thing with a chipped neck and worn strings. He wasn't particularly good yet, but there was something honest about how he played. Not to impress, just to feel something in the space between chords. One evening, as the sun began to lower behind the hills, he strummed a melody that caught me off guard. I knew it. I hadn't heard it in decades. "Where'd you learn that?" I asked from the porch. He looked up, smiling. "Dad hummed it last time I visited him. Said Grandpa used to play it while fixing things." I blinked. My throat tightened. He did. The tune was one of Robert's, soft, uneven, just a little melancholic. I used to hear it in the garage while he worked on old radios. I hadn't realized how deeply it had etched itself into me, until now echoed through the hands of our grandson. He didn't know it, but in that moment, 3 generations were sitting together. One playing, one listening, one remembered. Julian texted occasionally, brief, respectful, no grand gestures, no requests, just presence. "Hope the lake's calm this week," or "Tell him to wear sunscreen." I didn't always respond, but when I did, it was simple. "He's happy here." That was enough. One afternoon, my grandson asked me, "Do you ever think you'll forgive Dad?" I paused. "Forgiveness isn't something you give once and it's done," I said. "It's something you re-choose every time the memory stings again." "I'm still choosing." He thought about that. "Do you hate him?" "No," I said, but I stopped needing him to love me right before I could breathe again. He nodded slowly. "I think he's really trying now. Then I hope he finds peace, whether I'm a part of that or not." He seemed to accept that. Some truths are better absorbed at a young age, before ego becomes a shield, before you mistake success for immunity from shame. That week, Julian asked to visit again. Just him. No events, no audience. "Can I come up?" he asked. "To help with anything, I don't want to talk. I just want to be useful." I hesitated, not because I didn't believe him, but because I knew what effort cost him now. He was relearning how to be human, and that was its own fragile thing. I agreed. He arrived Saturday morning. No suitcase, just a thermos and a pair of work gloves. "Where should I start?" he asked. I handed him a broom and pointed toward the barn. It hadn't been cleaned in 5 years. "Don't miss the corners." He didn't complain, didn't joke, just swept. For hours. I watched from the window. The man who once prided himself on leading board meetings in $1,000 suits was now shoving mouse nests out from under rotting crates without flinching. At lunch, I brought him lemonade. We sat on the porch not saying much, just watching the trees sway. Finally, he spoke. It's quiet here. I think that's what scared me when I was younger. You were afraid of your own mind, afraid of what I'd remember if things got too quiet. He looked down, like how much I hurt you. I sipped my drink. You did hurt me. He didn't defend himself. He just nodded. I thought money was the best apology, he said. But it became my way of keeping you in the past, out of the way. And you were afraid I'd remind people where you came from, I added. He looked at me. Yes. There it was. Finally. No sugar, no spin. Just truth dropped like stone in still water. Then let's leave it here, I said. In this dirt. With the dust. He blinked. Really? You want absolution? I want silence. If this is the middle, it'll do. He smiled. Not in triumph, not in relief. Just softly. Thank you. He left before sundown. Said he had things to fix back home, not paperwork, not finances, relationships. I told my son I want him to come live with me for a while. If he wants. No pressure. He likes it here, I warned. Julian nodded. I won't take that from him. That night, I sat by the fireplace, a puzzle spread out across the coffee table. I always start with the edges. Robert used to tease me for that. Just once try the middle, he'd say. But I never did. I needed the boundaries. I needed to know where it began and ended. But now, I picked up a centerpiece first. Fitted against nothing. Just held it. Sometimes redemption doesn't come from the top down. It comes sideways. Quiet. Almost unnoticeable, like the way pain stops one morning, and you realize you've been breathing without noticing. I went to bed that night and slept deeply. No ghosts, no waiting. In the morning, the sky was clear. The leaves began to turn early that year. Just the tips at first gold, brushing the edges of green like the season was testing its courage before fully letting go. I sat on the porch blanket over my knees, watching the trees change, like I used to watch Julian grow with wonder. A little fear and a quiet ache, knowing nothing stays small or simple forever. Autumn had always been Robert's favorite. He used to say it was the only honest season. Everything strips down, everything falls apart, but it's beautiful doing it. I never understood it when he was alive. I do now. Julian didn't visit in person after that day at the barn, but he wrote. Not performative essays like before, just small letters always handwritten. One came every other week, regular as breath. Some were long, some only a few lines. One simply said, I drove by the old house. You were everywhere in it, even in the parts I'd painted over. Another said I found a photo of Dad in the garage. He was younger than I am now. I stared at it for 10 minutes. I never replied. Not out of bitterness, but because some messages don't require answers. Sometimes you just let people speak into silence and hope they hear their own echoes clearly enough. Meanwhile, my grandson kept coming. His visits had changed. He stopped staying overnight, but he always arrived with purpose sometimes, with sheet music he'd written. Sometimes with groceries once, with an old video camera he found at a thrift store. I want to record you, he said. Just talking, stories. Nothing fancy. I agreed. He filmed me in the living room by the fireplace on the porch with the lake behind us. He asked about my childhood, about his grandfather, about how I met Julian's father, about the worst and best moments I'd lived through. I answered everything. On the last tape, he asked, what's the thing you're proudest of? I didn't hesitate. That I loved without shrinking. He smiled. I'm going to use that in a song. Good, I said. Make it loud. In late October, I received notice from Michael. The trust transfer had completed. The Vermont house, the accounts, the remainder of Robert's original estate, all now legally reassigned to my grandson. Julian had signed everything without contest. Michael sent a copy of the agreement. It included one personal addendum Julian had attached at the end. I request that no monetary asset from this estate return to me. I was its beneficiary long enough. What's left belongs with those who still know how to protect it. I read it twice, then burned it in the fireplace. Not out of spite, but because it was finished. He had finally stepped away without trying to linger. That was more than I'd expected. The following weekend I drove into town and had my will notarized. No revisions, just formalities. My attorney asked, "Do you want to leave anything for Julian?" I said, "No, not objects. He has his own house now, his own silence." She nodded, stamped the page, and filed it away. I walked out into the wind, feeling nothing but clarity. Not peace that had arrived already, but something sturdier. A finality that didn't need to be declared. At home, I opened a drawer and took out the last thing I hadn't dealt with, the letter I had written to my grandson months earlier. I unfolded it, read it one last time, and smiled. Then I placed it back in the box, sealed it, and wrote on the top, "Open after I'm gone." Everything else has already been said. The first snow came early, gentle like an apology. I watched it fall while holding a cup of tea, the lights dim, the fire low. My grandson was expected the next day. He was bringing friends from school. "They want to meet you," he said. "They've heard all about the lake lady with the sharp voice and better advice than therapy." I laughed. "I'll make cookies." I knew then that this quiet rhythm was my ending. Not a dramatic break, not a confrontation. Just this. My story had stopped revolving around Julian, around what I'd lost or what had been twisted. That was the real power. Not revenge, not exposure, but release. I had let go of needing to be seen the way I once was, and in doing that, I became more visible than ever. I wrote one final note that night. For Julian. I hope you find joy. Not the kind that takes applause, the kind that wakes you at 6 a.m. with nothing but the sound of birds and the thought that maybe you're finally enough. That's what I wanted for you even when I forgot how to say it. I didn't send it. I placed it in the same box with the old concert ticket and his crooked Mother's Day card. Some words are better left waiting. The snow thickened over the next week, blanketing everything in a hush so complete it felt like the world itself was holding its breath. The trees bowed under the weight. The lake stilled. Even the birds fell quiet. Vermont in winter is a kind of dream not soft or magical, but deeply still. A silence that doesn't ask you to speak. It just lets you be. That's what I craved most now. Not closure, because I'd already found it. Not reconciliation, because what needed mending had been laid to rest. Just space. Just the long, uninterrupted breath of peace. My grandson came that weekend just as promised. He brought 3 friends, good boys, nervous at first but kind. They helped shovel the walk-stacked logs by the porch and complimented my stew like I'd won a prize. I liked them. They were loud in the kitchen, gentle in the living room. I caught one of them staring at the old fishing photo above the fireplace. "Is that your husband?" he asked. I nodded. "He'd have liked you boys," I said. "You've got respect in your eyes." They left the next morning, but my grandson stayed behind. Just him and me, the old rhythm. After dinner, we sat by the fire and listened to the wood pop. He played a song he'd written. It didn't rhyme. It didn't follow any radio-friendly structure. But it had truth in every line. One verse went, "She never raised her voice, just built a life so solid it didn't need defense." I closed my eyes. Let the tears fall. Not pain, just recognition. He asked quietly, "Do you think he'll ever come here again?" He meant Julian. I took a long breath. "Maybe, but I don't need him to. I think he wants to." "I know. But that's his work now, not mine." He nodded. Didn't push. Later that night, after he'd gone to sleep, I opened the bottom drawer of Robert's old desk. Inside was the last untouched piece of our life together, the trust ledger. I ran my hands along the spine, opened it one final time. My handwriting joined his in the margins, now dates notes initials. The story we'd both written line by line without fanfare. I removed one last document, a letter of transference officially granting full ownership of the house, the land, and the Vermont accounts to my grandson, effective immediately. Not upon my death. Now. I'd already signed it. The next morning, I handed it to him at breakfast. "What's this?" he asked. I folded my hands. The keys were never the point. "But now they're yours. The house, the land, the stories. Keep them how you see fit." He opened the folder, read the top page. His lips parted. Why now? I smiled. Because everything I built was meant to be passed down, and I'd rather give it with warm hands than cold ones. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, "I'll protect it." "I know you will." That afternoon, Julian called. I hadn't heard his voice in weeks. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hi, Mom," he said. I waited. He took a shaky breath. I heard what you did. With the house. The accounts. You gave it to him already?" "Yes. Before you?" "Yes." He was quiet. I think that's the most generous thing I've ever seen. I didn't answer. I could feel the weight behind his silence. I wanted to ask something he said. Not for me. For him. "When the time comes, could I speak at the memorial?" I closed my eyes. "Yes," I said. "But make sure the story you tell is true." He choked a little. "It will be. I promise." After we hung up, I sat by the window and watched the trees sway gently under the burden of snow. Not breaking. Just bending. That's what life had been. Not a straight line, but a long, slow curve bending back toward the truth. Toward center. Toward home. A few days later, my grandson returned to the city. He left behind a new painting he'd made simple lines. The silhouette of a woman standing at the edge of a lake. Arms folded the trees behind her, bending like guardians. He titled it, Inheritance. I hung it beside Robert's photo. The house didn't feel empty when he left. It felt full, still, rooted. I no longer feared the days ahead. There would be fewer of them, yes. But they would be mine. Lived without regret, spoken in my own voice, and left behind in careful hands. That night, I sat with a fresh sheet of paper. Wrote one more line. The story ends here, not with applause, but with understanding. I folded it, placed it in the final box, and closed the lid. The last morning came softly. No thunderclap, no revelation. Just light pale and stretched thin across the frosted windows, creeping in like a quiet guest. I woke before the sun crested fully. My joints ached more than usual, but I didn't mind. That ache was familiar now, like a whisper from time reminding me I was still here. I slipped on my robe, made tea, and stood at the window, watching the snow fall in lazy spirals. The lake was frozen again. Still. Silent. Holding the season like a secret. And I thought, yes, this is the day. I'd known for a while. The body tells you long before a doctor ever can. It speaks in fatigue, in deep bone heaviness, in that strange sense of being ready without fear. I wasn't sick, not yet, but I felt the long slope approaching, and it didn't scare me. Not anymore. I'd seen too much to be afraid of endings. I dressed in the softest clothes I owned, pulled my hair back neatly, and opened the old cedar chest by the fireplace. Inside were the things that mattered most, Robert's watch still ticking. My wedding ring, the ledger, the photo of Julian fishing. My grandson's first music composition scrawled in pencil on torn paper, and the final letters mine to each of them. To Julian, I gave no judgment, only memory. I wrote, "You lost yourself trying to become more than us. But there was never shame in where you came from, only pride you didn't know how to carry. I hope you finally understand that your greatest legacy isn't your company or your fortune. It's what you choose to protect when no one's watching." To my grandson, I left something simpler. The house is yours now, but so is the silence. Guard both, and when the world gets too loud, come home. It will always be here, even if I'm not. I tucked the letters where they'd find them. I lit one final fire. The smell of cedar and pine filled the air. I sat in Robert's chair, tea cooling beside me, hands folded in my lap. And for a long while, I simply watched the flames dance. They reminded me of everything: the way love flickers but doesn't die, the way pain burns but also clears, the way even betrayal leaves behind a kind of clarity. Julian called that afternoon. I let it ring just once before answering. His voice was soft, careful. "Hey, I was just thinking about you." "I know," I said. "You always call when you are." He paused. "I was wondering, could I visit again?" "Not this time," I said. "Soon maybe, but not today." He understood. I could hear it in his breath. "I miss you." I smiled gently. "You're remembering me. That's enough." After we hung up, I stepped outside one last time. The air was cold, but clean. Pure in a way city air never is. I walked to the edge of the lake, stood in the same place Robert used to stand before, casting a line, and I closed my eyes. I pictured him there beside me, young, laughing, our son tugging his sleeve. The old days, quiet, full, golden, in the way memory polishes even the hardest moments. I whispered I held on as long as I needed to. Now I'm ready to let go. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote the last page of my journal. I was not forgotten. I was not erased. I was simply waiting to be remembered by the ones who needed time to see me clearly. Then I closed the book, set it beside the fireplace, and turned off the lights. 3 days later, Julian arrived unannounced. My grandson met him in the driveway, his hands in his jacket pockets, eyes red but calm. "She's gone," he said, peacefully, just like she wanted. Julian stood still, snow falling around him. Then he asked, Did she leave anything?" The boy nodded, led him inside, handed him the ledger. Nothing more. Julian sat by the fireplace where the embers were still warm. He opened the book, turned the pages slowly, taking in every note, every date, every signature. Then he found the letter. He read it twice, then once more. And when he finally looked up, tears streaked his face. Not from guilt, not from shame, but from the ache of being seen fully finally after so long. He didn't speak. He just placed the ledger back on the shelf. Outside, the snow continued falling. Soft, relentless, honest. And in that quiet, a legacy settled into its rightful place. Not carved in stone, not shouted in rooms full of applause, but passed hand to hand, heart to heart, like flame from one candle to another.